What would you do if a single act of kindness changed your entire world? For Ilara Vance, a 24-year-old waitress, drowning in debt a rainy Tuesday night, was supposed to be just another shift of spilled drinks and fake smiles. She had no idea that the drunk, broken man she helped in the back alley was Julian Hawthorne, a billionaire on the verge of losing everything. She expected a simple thank you. What she got was a black car, a silent chauffeur, and an offer that would force her to question everything she believed about money integrity and the true price of a human heart. Stay with us, because this isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of how one night can redefine a lifetime. The rain didn't just fall on Soho that Tuesday night. It waged a war against the city. It hammered against the large plate-glass windows of Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive that its name was only whispered among the city's elite. Inside, the air was a warm, fragrant cloud of truffle oil, aged Bordeaux, and the faint metallic scent of money. Outside, the world was a cold, blurry mess. For Ilara Vance, the world on the other side of that glass felt 1,000,000 miles away. Her world was one of aching feet, a strained smile, and the relentless looping track of anxieties in her head. The rent was due Friday. Her mother's prescription copay had gone up again. The rejection email from the Pratt Institute's scholarship fund still felt like a physical sting. Every perfectly seared scallop and crystal glass of champagne she delivered to the patrons of Aurelia was a bitter reminder of the chasm between her life and theirs. Her shift was supposed to have ended an hour ago, but a co-worker had called in sick, and Ilara, who never said no to extra hours, was now running on fumes and lukewarm coffee. She was clearing table 7, her movements a study in practiced efficiency, when she first saw him. He wasn't like the other patrons. They were polished, preened, and performed their wealth with casual arrogance. This man was a storm contained in a human form. He sat alone at the smallest table in the darkest corner of the bar, a place usually reserved for staff breaks. He wore a Tom Ford suit that, even in its current state of dishevelment, probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His tie was loosened, his dark hair was damp and fell over his forehead, and his hand, which held a glass of what looked like straight Macallan, 25, trembled almost imperceptibly. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a startlingly clear shade of grey, like a winter sky, and they were utterly vacant. He wasn't looking at anything. He was staring into a void, and Ilara had the unnerving feeling that the void was staring back. He'd been there for 3 hours ordering doubles and speaking to no one. The staff buzzed with speculation. "That's Julian Hawthorne," a junior bartender had whispered to her. "Hawthorne Enterprises. His family basically owns half of Midtown." The name meant nothing to Ilara. A billionaire was a billionaire. Their problems were abstract concepts to her, like theoretical physics. Just after 11 p.m. he finally moved to stand. The motion was clumsy, a sudden uncoordinated lurch that sent his chair scraping backward. He dropped a wad of cash on the table, far more than enough to cover his bill, and started for the door. Not the main entrance, but the service door that led to the back alley. Marco, the burly manager, moved to intercept him. "Sir, your car is usually out front. Can I call your driver?" The man, Julian Hawthorne, waved a dismissive hand, his focus on the door. "Don't need one." His voice was a low, rough rasp, sanded down by whiskey and something deeper. He pushed the door open and disappeared into the torrential rain. Ilara watched a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Something was wrong. This wasn't the swagger of a rich man on a bender. It was the hollowed-out shuffle of a man who had lost his way. She thought of her father in the yaws after the factory closed, drinking to forget that he had nothing left to provide. The memory was a shard of ice in her gut. Just let him go, Marco grumbled, scooping up the cash. He's not our problem now. But Ilara couldn't shake the image of his eyes. She found herself moving, untying her stained apron and grabbing her thin coat from a hook. I'm just going to make sure he's okay, she said more to herself than to anyone else. The alley was a canyon of wet brick and overflowing dumpsters. The rain was a deafening roar, plastering her hair to her face in seconds. And there he was, leaning heavily against the wall, his head bowed, the rain soaking his $1,000 suit. He looked smaller out here, stripped of the restaurant's opulent backdrop. He was just a man lost and drenched in the storm. "Sir," Ilara called out, her voice thin against the wind. "Are you all right? You shouldn't be out here." He lifted his head slowly. The rain dripped from his chin. For a moment, his grey eyes focused on her, and a flicker of something confusion, maybe surprise, passed through them. "Should be somewhere," he slurred. "Just not sure where." He tried to take a step and stumbled, his legs giving way. Without thinking, Ilara lunged forward, grabbing his arm to steady him. He was surprisingly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and despair. The fabric of his suit was soaked, but beneath it she could feel the tension coiled in his frame. "Where is your car?" she asked, her voice firm, cutting through his drunken haze. He gestured vaguely toward the end of the alley. "Black. Royce. Somewhere." It was a ridiculous scene. A waitress in a worn-out coat, holding up a billionaire who could barely stand in a filthy, rain-lashed alley. She could have walked away. She should have, but the profound loneliness radiating from him was a feeling she understood all too well. "Okay," she said, making a decision. "Okay, let's get you there. Lean on me." It was a slow, arduous process. He was a tall man, and she was fighting to keep them both upright on the slick pavement. The smell of expensive whiskey and rain was overwhelming. He mumbled incoherently fragments of sentences about betrayal, stock prices, and a name, Marcus. They finally reached the street. Parked a half-block down, almost invisible in the deluge, was a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, its engine silent. The symbol of a world so far from her own, it might as well have been on another planet. "Is that it?" she asked. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. She half dragged him to the passenger side, fumbling with the heavy, unfamiliar door handle until it clicked open. She helped him collapse into the plush leather seat. He slumped against the window, his eyes closing, his breathing evening, out into the shallow rhythm of impending sleep. For a second, he looked almost peaceful, the harsh lines of his face softened. She was about to close the door, when his eyes fluttered open again. He looked at her, his gaze clearing for just a moment. There was no arrogance in it, no condescension, just a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "Thank you," he whispered the words, barely audible. "Just get home safe," she replied softly. She closed the door, the solid, expensive thud, sealing him in his world and leaving her in hers. As she turned to walk away, a glint of light from the back of the service alley caught her eye. She walked back, her curiosity piqued. There, on top of a grimy, overturned crate where he had been standing, was a watch. It wasn't just a watch. It was a masterpiece of platinum and leather, its face a complex constellation of dials and gears under sapphire crystal. It gleamed even in the dim light, utterly out of place in the filth of the alley. He must have taken it off his fingers, clumsy with drink. He'd left it behind. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She picked it up. It was heavy, cool, and felt like power in her hand. She knew with a sickening certainty that this small object was worth more than she could ever hope to earn in a decade. The thought, ugly and immediate, flashed through her mind. This could solve everything: her mother's medical bills, the overdue rent, a down payment on a small studio where she could finally set up her easel and paint. It was a ticket out. She stood there for a long time, the rain washing over her, the weight of the watch in her palm feeling heavier and heavier with every passing second. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in quiet torment. The watch, a Patek Philippe Grande Complication, according to a quick, heart-stopping Google search, sat hidden in a porcelain tea tin at the back of her kitchen cupboard. It was a silent, ticking bomb in her tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in Queens. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren wailing in the distance sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. She imagined police breaking down her door, or worse, someone connected to Julian Hawthorne, a man who probably had lawyers more ruthless than sharks accusing her of theft. She'd spent the first night sleepless, pacing her small living room, the watch clutched in her hand. One search had revealed its value to be somewhere north of $300. It wasn't a ticket out. It was a new life for her and her mother. Eleanor Vance was withering away in a state-run care facility, upstate, her MS progressing with a cruel, unyielding certainty. There was an experimental treatment program, a private clinic with a waiting list a mile long, and a price tag that was to Elara an astronomical joke. That watch wasn't a watch. It was her mother's chance to walk in a garden again. But every time she looked at it, she saw his eyes. Those unguarded, vulnerable grey eyes in the rain. He had been broken, and she had helped him. Taking this watch felt like looting a shipwreck. It felt like a betrayal of the one clean human impulse she'd acted on in a long time. Her integrity was the one thing she owned outright. Was she really willing to sell it? She resolved to return it. But how? She couldn't just walk into the gleaming fortress of Hawthorne Enterprises and say, "Excuse me, your CEO left his $250,000 watch in an alley." They would think she was a thief or an extortionist. She didn't even have his contact information. By Thursday evening, she was a wreck. She'd called out of her shift at Aurelia, claiming a migraine, unable to face the place where it had all started. She was sketching aimlessly in her notepad, trying to lose herself in the familiar lines of a charcoal portrait, when she heard it. It wasn't a normal sound for her street, which was usually filled with the rumble of the elevated train and the chatter of a dozen languages. This was a low, powerful purr, a sound so smooth and refined it felt alien. She peeked through the blinds of her window. Down below, parked directly in front of her dilapidated building, was the black Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was as out of place as a diamond in a dustbin, its polished chrome and impossibly black paint seeming to absorb the light from the street lamps. People on the sidewalk were stopping to stare, taking pictures with their phones. Elara's blood ran cold. He found me. How her name tag at the restaurant. See CCTV. It didn't matter. They were here. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, impeccably dressed, in a classic black chauffeur's uniform, with silver hair and a posture that could have been carved from granite. He moved with a calm, unhurried grace, scanning the front of her building, before his eyes seemed to lock directly onto her window. It felt as if he knew exactly where she was. He didn't come to the front door. He didn't buzz her apartment. He simply stood beside the car patient, and still a silent, waiting sentinel. The message was clear. "We know you're here. The next move is yours." Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. The accusation. The confrontation. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she retrieved the tea tin from the cupboard. She wrapped the Patek Philippe carefully in a soft cloth and put it in her coat pocket. Her hand was trembling so badly, She could barely work the zipper. Squaring her shoulders, she walked out of her apartment and down the 4 flights of stairs, each step echoing her own dread. When she stepped out onto the street, the chauffeur turned to face her. His expression was completely neutral, his face a mask of professional deference. "Miss Ilara Vance?" he asked. His voice was a calm, cultured baritone with a hint of an English accent. "Yes." She managed her own voice, barely a whisper. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I am Mr. Hawthorne's personal driver." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "He asked me to find you." Ilara's hand tightened around the watch in her pocket. I have something that belongs to him," she said, pulling it out. The watch seemed to flash obscenely under the orange glow of the streetlight. "He left it. In the alley." Arthur looked at the watch, then back at her. His eyes, she noticed, were intelligent and deeply perceptive. He seemed to be taking her measure, looking for something beyond the surface. He didn't seem surprised to see the watch. He was aware that he had misplaced it, Arthur said, calmly. He was more concerned with the identity of the person who helped him. This caught her off guard. He remembers a kindness in the rain. Arthur replied, his choice of words oddly poetic. "It took some effort to identify you. Mr. Hawthorne is a very private man, but the manager at Aurelia was persuaded to be helpful." Ilara imagined Marco, his bravado, melting under the pressure of a billionaire's inquiry. "Please just give this back to him," she said, holding out the watch. "Tell him I'm sorry it took me a couple of days. I didn't know how to reach him." Arthur did not take the watch. Instead, he opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was a cavern of soft cream leather and polished wood, glowing faintly with ambient light. It smelled of wealth. "Mr. Hawthorne would prefer to thank you himself," Arthur said. "He has also instructed me to extend an offer to you. He requests a meeting at your earliest convenience. Tomorrow morning, perhaps." Ilara stared at the open door, then at the chauffeur's impassive face. "An offer? What kind of offer? A reward? A warning?" Her mind raced through a dozen paranoid scenarios. A meeting about what? "That is for Mr. Hawthorne to discuss," Arthur said smoothly. "I am merely the messenger. He will be at his office at 10 o'clock. I am to escort you should you accept the invitation." The choice hung in the air, thick and heavy. She could hand over the watch, turn around, and walk back up to her tiny apartment and her life of quiet desperation. Or she could get into that car tomorrow morning and step into the lion's den. One path was safe known. The other was a terrifying, gleaming unknown. She thought of her mother. She thought of the mountain of bills on her kitchen table. She thought of the fact that this man, this Julian Hawthorne, hadn't sent police or lawyers. He had sent his most trusted employee in his most luxurious car to extend a personal invitation. It wasn't an accusation. It was something else, entirely. 10 o'clock, Ilara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll be ready." Arthur Penhaligon gave another one of his small, formal nods. "Very good, Miss Vance." He didn't take the watch. He simply closed the car door, returned to the driver's seat, and the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb as silently as it had arrived, leaving Ilara standing on the sidewalk, the Patek Philippe still in her hand, the world feeling stranger and more precarious than ever before. The Hawthorne Enterprises building was a spear of smoked glass and steel that pierced the sky over Midtown Manhattan. It was less a building and more a statement of raw, unapologetic power. The lobby was a cathedral of white marble and corporate art, where people spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Ilara dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, a simple black dress and a worn but clean blazer felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. Arthur had picked her up precisely at 9:30 a.m., his demeanor as impeccably professional as it had been the night before. The ride was silent, a smooth glide through the city's chaotic traffic. He had not taken the watch from her. It was still in her bag, a heavy, cold weight against her hip. He led her not to a main bank of elevators, but to a private one, operated by a keycard he produced from his pocket. The ride was unnervingly fast and silent, opening directly into a reception area, so vast and minimalist, it felt more like a modern art gallery. A single person sat behind a desk of what looked like a solid block of granite. "Miss Vance is here to see Mr. Hawthorne," Arthur announced. The receptionist nodded and gestured toward a pair of massive oak doors. "He is expecting you." Arthur gave Elara a final, unreadable look. "I will be here when you are finished." Taking a breath, Elara pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The office was breathtaking. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a godlike view of Central Park. The furniture was sleek, modern, and undoubtedly worth a fortune, yet the room felt cold, sterile, and impersonal. It was the office of a man who didn't live here, but merely commanded from it. Julian Hawthorne stood by the window, his back to her. He was no longer the disheveled, broken man from the alley. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, his hair was neatly styled, and his posture radiated an intimidating aura of control. When he turned, his face was a mask of cool indifference. The vulnerability she had seen was gone, replaced by the hardened, cynical expression of a man used to getting exactly what he wanted. His grey eyes, now sharp and analytical, swept over her, taking in her cheap dress and nervous stance. It was a dismissive, calculated appraisal that made her feel 2 inches tall. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. It held none of the rasping weakness she remembered. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to one of the 2 chairs facing his enormous desk. She sat perching on the edge of the plush leather. He remained standing, a deliberate power play she recognized immediately. "You have something of mine," he stated, his tone flat. Wordlessly, Elara opened her bag, took out the cloth-wrapped watch, and placed it on the polished surface of his desk. He glanced at it, but didn't touch it. Its market value is approximately $350,000. A life-changing sum for someone in your position. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "Why didn't you sell it?" The question was a test, a scalpel designed to see what was inside her. "Because it wasn't mine to sell," Elara replied, her voice quiet but firm. She would not be intimidated. "You were in a bad way, Mr. Hawthorne. Taking advantage of that would be theft." A flicker of something surprise respect passed through his eyes before the mask snapped back into place. He walked around his desk and finally sat down, leaning back in his chair. He seemed to fill the room, his presence immense. Kindness and integrity, he mused as if they were foreign concepts. They are rare commodities, especially in this city, especially when directed at me. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. "Which brings me to the reason you are here. I have a proposition for you." Elara's heart began to beat faster. "A proposition. A business arrangement," he corrected. "I find myself in a delicate situation. I was recently betrayed on a massive scale by my former partner and protégé Marcus Thorne. He conspired with members of my own board to orchestrate a hostile takeover of a subsidiary company using proprietary information he stole from me. The fallout has been significant. It has made my investors nervous. They see instability, weakness. He spoke of this colossal betrayal with the detached air of a surgeon discussing a routine procedure. "What does this have to do with me?" Ilara asked, confused. "Perception, Miss Vance. That is what this is about," he said, leaning forward. "Thorne is not just attacking my business, he is attacking my reputation. He is spreading rumors painting me as erratic, unstable a man who has lost his grip since his fiancée, Isabel Sterling, broke off our engagement last month, a development he also had a hand in." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I need to project an image of absolute stability and control. I have a series of crucial events over the next 3 months. Shareholder meetings, charity galas, a major international merger negotiation. At these events, Thorne and his allies will be watching, looking for any crack in my armor." He finally came to the point. "I require a companion, an assistant, someone who can be by my side, who is intelligent, presentable, and most importantly, completely unknown to my social or business circles. Someone who, by their very presence, signals that my personal life is orderly and untroubled. Someone who is for all intents and purposes invisible, yet whose loyalty is absolute because it is bought and paid for." Ilara stared at him, stunned into silence. He wanted to hire her, to be his platonic professional escort, to be a prop in his corporate war. "You want me to pretend. I want you to be my executive assistant with a public-facing role." He clarified his tone, sharp and precise. "You will manage my schedule for these events. You will accompany me, you will be briefed on who to speak to and who to avoid. You will be professional, discreet, and convincing. In private, we will have no contact beyond what is necessary for this arrangement. In public, you will be an unassuming but constant presence." It was the most bizarre, cold-blooded job offer she had ever heard. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could hire any number of professionals for this. Professionals are known. They can be bought by the other side. They have their own motives," he said, his eyes cold. "You, Miss Vance, are a complete unknown. But more than that, you had a $350,000 temptation in your hands for 2 days, and you chose to return it. That tells me you have a price, but it's not one that can be paid in cash alone. It tells me you possess a degree of integrity that is almost foolishly rare. I can't trust anyone in my world, but I can trust your principles, so I will purchase your time and your discretion instead." He slid a heavy leather-bound folder across the desk. "Your contract." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The numbers inside made her dizzy. A 3-month contract, a salary that was more than she made in 5 years at Aurelia, a completion bonus that was staggering, and a separate upfront signing bonus. She stared at the figure for the signing bonus, $150,000, the exact amount needed for the down payment and initial treatment at the private clinic for her mother. It was so precise, it couldn't be a coincidence. He hadn't just found out who she was. He'd had her investigated. He knew about her mother. He knew her exact point of leverage. This wasn't an offer. It was a perfectly crafted trap. He had found her price, after all. The coldness of his calculation was staggering. He had dissected her life, found her greatest vulnerability, and was now pressing down on it with all the weight of his fortune. A wave of nausea and fury washed over her. "You investigated me," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You looked into my mother's health." Julian Hawthorne did not flinch. "I am a businessman, Miss Vance. I do not make investments without due diligence. I needed to know if your principles could be relied upon, and if my offer would be compelling enough to ensure your absolute loyalty. Your situation, while unfortunate, provides that assurance." She wanted to stand up, throw the folder in his face, and walk out. She wanted to tell him that her mother's life was not a bargaining chip in his petty war with another billionaire. But then the phone in her pocket buzzed. It was a text from the care facility upstate. "Miss Vance, please call us at your earliest convenience to discuss a change in your mother's condition." The blood drained from her face. A change in condition was always bad news. Time was running out. Hope was running out. Julian watched her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a glint of victory. He knew he had her. She looked from the phone to the contract, and finally to the cold, handsome face of the man who was offering her a deal with the devil. He was using her, yes, but she could use him too, for her mother. "There are conditions," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its strength. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The money for the signing bonus. I want it wired today, to the clinic's account, not mine," she said. "And the contract will include a non-disclosure agreement that works both ways. You will never speak of my family or my personal life to anyone ever. And finally, I'll need a new wardrobe." A slow, cold smile touched Julian Hawthorne's lips for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Welcome to Hawthorne Enterprises, Miss Vance." The transformation was swift and mercilessly efficient. Ilara's old life was unceremoniously packed away. The signing bonus was wired to the clinic before she even left Julian's office, a transaction confirmed with a cold, impersonal email. That afternoon, a black car driven by the ever-silent Arthur took her not to her apartment in Queens, but to a corporate suite at the Mandarin Oriental overlooking Central Park, her new residence for the duration of the contract. The suite was bigger than her entire apartment building floor, a sterile expanse of beige furniture, abstract art, and floor-to-ceiling windows. It felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed cage. On the bed were dozens of boxes from Bergdorf Goodman Net-a-Porter and Saks Fifth Avenue. A sleek laptop sat on the desk, preloaded with a packed schedule and extensive dossiers on every person she would be expected to encounter. It was overwhelming. 1 minute she was a waitress, worried about a $50 utility bill. The next she was staring at a closet full of clothes from designers whose names she could barely pronounce: Chanel, Dior, Valentino. A coolly professional stylist named Genevieve arrived and spent 5 hours fitting her, tailoring her, and lecturing her on the subtle but crucial differences between old money and new money aesthetics. Mr. Hawthorne's circle is old money. Genevieve had explained, holding up a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue sheath dress. They despise ostentation. Elegance is understatement. Your role is to look impeccable but forgettable. A quiet, polished accessory. An accessory. The word stung, but it was accurate. That was her job. The first week was a blur of training. There were lessons in etiquette wine tasting, and even the art of active listening in conversations where she was expected to contribute nothing of substance. Julian was a ghost. She received his instructions via encrypted emails and daily briefings from his executive secretary, a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Davies. He was molding her into the perfect tool for his purposes, but he remained completely detached from the process. Her first test came 10 days into the contract, the annual Preservation Society Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the pinnacle of New York's social calendar, a shark tank masquerading as a charity event. As she stood before the mirror in her suite, Ilara felt like she was looking at a stranger. She was wearing a deep emerald green silk gown by Carolina Herrera that shimmered when she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and a simple but dazzling pair of diamond earrings on loan, as a note had icily informed her, were her only jewelry. She looked the part. but inside her stomach was a knot of pure terror. Arthur drove her to a private entrance at the museum where Julian was waiting. Seeing him in a perfectly tailored tuxedo took her breath away. He was devastatingly handsome, an image of cold masculine perfection. He looked at her, his eyes doing a quick, critical scan from head to toe. "Acceptable," was his only comment. He offered her his arm. His touch was firm and impersonal, but the slight warmth of his hand through the fabric of her glove sent a strange jolt through her. "Your objective tonight is simple," he murmured as they walked through a marble hall toward the sound of the orchestra. "Smile, say little, and do not leave my side. You are my executive assistant here to ensure my evening runs smoothly. If anyone asks about your background, it is vague business administration recently hired from a competitor. Your name is Elara Vance. Nothing more." The grand hall was a glittering sea of diamonds couture and barely concealed ambition. Heads turned as they entered. Whispers followed them like the rustle of silk. Elara could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her, trying to place her. It was suffocating. They were immediately approached by a striking woman in a silver dress that seemed poured onto her body. She had blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that was both beautiful and predatory. The dossier had prepared Elara for this. Isabel Sterling, Julian's ex-fiancée. "Julian, darling." Isabel purred her eyes, flicking dismissively over Elara. "I had no idea you were coming, and you've brought the help." Her tone was laced with venomous sweetness. Julian's grip on Elara's arm tightened almost imperceptibly. "Isabel," he said, his voice smooth as ice. "This is Elara Vance, my new executive assistant. She is proving to be invaluable." Isabel's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She turned her full attention to Elara. "An assistant? How practical. Tell me, Miss Vance, where did Julian find you? You don't look like you've spent much time in a boardroom." This was a direct attack designed to fluster and expose her. Elara's training kicked in. She met Isabel's gaze with a calm, polite smile, just as she'd been taught. "Mr. Hawthorne values efficiency over pedigree," Elara said, her voice even. "I was fortunate that my skills aligned with his needs." Her response was deliberately bland corporate and offered no personal details for Isabel to latch on to. Before Isabel could press further, a portly man with a booming voice approached. "Julian, good to see you. We need to talk about the Zurich merger." Julian smoothly turned his attention to the man drawing Elara with him. "Of course, Senator." The rest of the evening was a masterclass in social maneuvering. Julian navigated the room with the precision of a general, engaging in brief strategic conversations, his hand always resting lightly on the small of Elara's back, a subtle proprietary gesture for the benefit of onlookers. Elara played her part perfectly. She was a silent, graceful shadow. She watched, she listened, and she learned. She saw the fake smiles, the veiled insults, the constant jockeying for position. This world wasn't just wealthy, it was vicious. Her biggest challenge came when Julian was pulled into a private conversation with a group of investors, leaving her momentarily alone. A man with slicked back hair and a hungry look in his eyes immediately cornered her. The dossier identified him as Marcus Thorne, the betrayer. "So you're the new girl," Thorne said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. He gestured toward Julian, a word of advice. "He breaks everything he touches. Be careful he doesn't break you." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. His eyes were cold and reptilian. "Thank you for the advice, Mr. Thorne," she said, her expression a blank canvas. "But I find Mr. Hawthorne to be a consummate professional." Oh, he's professional, all right. Thorne chuckled a nasty, humorless sound. He's a professional at making you think he cares right before he cuts you loose. Ask Isabel. Ask me. He was trying to plant a seed of doubt to rattle her. But as she looked at him, Ilara didn't see a victim. She saw the same predatory instinct she'd seen in Isabel Sterling. They were two of a kind. Julian returned at that moment, his presence a palpable shield. He placed a hand on Ilara's arm and his eyes met Thorne's. A silent, venomous war was waged in that single glance. Thorne. Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. I'd heard the stench of desperation had followed you here. Now I see it's true. Thorne's face tightened, but he forced a smirk. Just making your assistant feel welcome, Julian. Enjoy your evening. He sauntered off, melting back into the crowd. For the rest of the night, Julian was tense, his movement sharp. The mask of cool control had slipped ever so slightly. In the car on the way back to the hotel, the silence was thick and heavy. Ilara expected him to drop her off without a word, as was their custom. But as the car pulled up to the Mandarin Oriental, he spoke. What did Thorne say to you? His voice was low, demanding. He warned me about you, Ilara answered honestly. He said you break everything you touch. Julian stared out the window at the glittering city lights, his jaw tight. He would know, he said, his voice laced with a bitterness so profound it startled her. He helped me do it. He turned to look at her then, and for the first time since that night in the alley, the mask was gone. His grey eyes were filled with a bleak, weary pain. You handled yourself well tonight, Miss Vance, he said, his tone softer, more genuine. Better than I expected. I just followed the instructions, Mr. Hawthorne, she replied. No, he said, shaking his head slightly. You did more than that. You weren't intimidated. Not by Isabel, not by him. He paused. Thank you. The two words were so unexpected, so starkly sincere, that Ilara was left speechless. He got out of the car, held the door for her, a gesture so out of character it felt monumental, and walked her to the private elevator. Good night, Ilara, he said, using her first name for the first time, without the formal title. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the silent elevator, her heart pounding for a reason she didn't want to examine too closely. She had survived the shark tank, but she was beginning to realize that the most dangerous creature wasn't in the water. He was the one who had thrown her in. And for the first time, she had seen the man behind the monster. The gala was a turning point. The rigid, invisible wall between Julian and Ilara began to show hairline fractures. The daily instructions from Mrs. Davies were replaced by direct, though still brief, morning meetings with Julian himself. They would sit on opposite ends of a long table in a conference room, a sterile no-man's land between them, and go over the day's schedule. He was still demanding, still aloof, but a new dynamic was emerging. He started asking for her opinion. Not on business matters, but on subtleties. What was your read on the Belgian ambassador's wife? He'd ask. Did you notice how Thorne and the senator's aide were speaking? His body language was off. Ilara, a natural observer, sharpened by years of waitressing, gave him honest, insightful answers. She noticed the small details he, as the center of attention, often missed. She became his eyes and ears, a silent partner in his strategic war. The accessory was becoming a valuable asset. One evening they were working late in his office, preparing for a hostile shareholder meeting. The room was dark, save for the glow of their laptops. The city lights twinkled below like a fallen constellation. Ilara had kicked off her heels, and Julian had loosened his tie. A comfortable silence had settled between them, the silence of two people focused on a common goal. Tired of staring at spreadsheets, Ilara opened a different file on her laptop, her personal design portfolio. It was filled with sketches she'd been working on in her spare moments at the hotel Innovative Architectural Designs for low-income sustainable housing. It was her secret dream, the real reason she'd been trying to get into Pratt. "What is that?" Julian's voice, startlingly close, made her jump. He was standing behind her, looking over her shoulder at the screen. Instinctively, she tried to close the file. "Nothing. Just a hobby." "Don't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Leave it open." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. He clicked through the files, his expression unreadable as he studied her designs. He zoomed in on a blueprint for a community center, his eyes tracing the lines of the roof, the placement of the windows, designed for maximum natural light. "This is not a hobby, Ilara," he said, after a long silence. His voice was filled with a strange reverence. "This is a vocation. The load-bearing calculations are precise. The use of reclaimed materials is both economical and structurally sound. The aesthetic is hopeful." He looked from the screen to her, and his eyes held a genuine, unadulterated respect she had never seen before. "Where did you learn to do this?" "I've been studying on my own for years," she admitted, her voice shy. "Online courses, library books. I wanted to be an architect, the kind who builds things for people who need them, not just for people who can afford them." "Hawthorne Enterprises has a charitable foundation," he said, his mind clearly working. "We fund urban renewal projects. We've never found a lead architect with a vision that was both practical and humane." He looked at her again. "This is brilliant." The praise coming from a man who offered so little of it felt like a physical warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Miss Vance, the assistant. He was looking at Ilara, the artist, the architect. He was seeing her. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted. He leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city he owned. "My grandfather built this company," he said, his voice distant. "He was a bricklayer from Ireland. He built things with his hands, real things, houses, schools. He believed that a building should serve the people inside it, not the ego of the man who built it." He sighed a heavy, weary sound. "I build wealth. I move numbers around on a screen. It's all intangible, abstract." He gestured to her design on the screen. "That is real. That matters." This was the most he had ever revealed about himself. She saw a glimpse of a man trapped in a legacy. He didn't choose a man who yearned for something tangible in a world of smoke and mirrors. "Why were you so drunk that night?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. It was too personal a breach of their contract. He didn't get angry. He just closed his eyes for a moment. "It was the anniversary of my brother's death," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And the day I found out Marcus Thorne, a man I treated like a brother, had sold me out for a few percentage points. It felt poetic. A day for ghosts." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful. He had lost his brother, and then suffered a second symbolic fraternal betrayal on the same day. His drunken despair in the alley suddenly made a terrible, tragic sense. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He opened his eyes and gave her a small, sad smile. "So am I." The intimacy of the moment was broken by the buzz of his phone. He glanced at it as the mask of Julian Hawthorne, CEO, slammed back into place. The warmth vanished, replaced by the familiar cool command. "The meeting is at 8 a.m. We're done for tonight," he said, standing up and straightening his tie. The spell was broken, but as Ilara packed her things, she knew something fundamental had changed. The lines of their business arrangement were becoming hopelessly blurred. He had seen her soul, and she had seen his. The gilded cage was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary for two lonely people, and that she knew was far more dangerous. The contract had an end date in 6 more weeks. She was starting to dread it. The growing intimacy between Elara and Julian became a tangible threat to their enemies. Their public partnership was so convincing, it began to dismantle Marcus Thorne's narrative of Julian's instability. Seeing their leverage disappear, Thorne and Julian's ex-fiancée Isabel Sterling decided to strike at the foundation of his newfound strength, Elara. They paid a bitter ex-co-worker from Aurelia to feed a fabricated story to a notorious gossip blog. The headline screamed, "Hawthorne's heiress trap." The article was a masterpiece of cruelty, twisting Elara's poverty and her mother's illness into a cunning plot. It portrayed her as a gold digger who had expertly ensnared a vulnerable, grieving billionaire, using his kindness against him. The story was a poison tailored to Julian's deepest fears. All his old cynicism, born from Thorne's original betrayal, resurfaced with a vengeance. The trust he and Elara had carefully built evaporated in an instant. He confronted her in his office, his face a cold mask. He didn't ask for her side, he delivered a verdict. "The core facts are correct," he stated, his voice like ice. "You simply provided a more palatable motivation." Stunned by his immediate lack of faith, Elara couldn't even defend herself. "Our contract is terminated," he said, pushing a check for the final bonus across the desk. "This concludes our business." The clinical words shattered her. Ignoring the money, she met his gaze, her heart breaking not for the job but for the man he had revealed himself to be. "I stayed because I thought the man I helped was still in there," she said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. "I was wrong." She walked away, leaving him alone with the wreckage of the one genuine connection he'd ever had. Hollowed out, Elara returned to her dusty Queen's apartment, the life she thought she'd escaped. She wanted nothing more than to forget the man with the cold eyes and the fragile heart she'd glimpsed underneath. In his penthouse office, Julian was besieged by a shame so profound it was a physical ache. His cynical worldview had been shattered by his most loyal employee, Arthur Penhaligon. The chauffeur had presented him with irrefutable proof, a damning recording of Marcus Thorne and Isabel Sterling buying their witness and grainy security footage from that first night. The video showed Elara in the rain-swept alley, staring at the $350,000 watch for 7 long minutes before turning away from the nearby pawn shop. "She did not see a bank account in that alley, sir," Arthur had said, his voice laced with disappointment. "She saw a human being in pain. You've forgotten how to recognize anything but sharks." The truth was a brutal gut punch. Julian had punished her for an integrity he couldn't comprehend. Leaving his suit jacket and chauffeured car behind, he hailed a yellow cab, a foreign, humbling act. He needed to face her, not as a billionaire, but as the man she had saved. He found her on the 4th floor. When she opened the door, her eyes were filled with weary pain. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice raw. "There's no excuse. I was wrong. I let my past blind me. I saw a betrayal that wasn't there because it was easier than believing in you." She stared at him, seeing not the powerful CEO but the broken man from the alley lost and trying to find his way back. After a long, charged silence, she stepped aside, holding the door open. "You can start," she whispered, "by coming inside out of the rain." Julian Hawthorne's journey didn't end on that doorstep. It began. He didn't just win back Elara's trust with words, but with actions. He publicly exposed Marcus Thorne and Isabel Sterling, not with corporate power, but with cold, hard truth. He then did something no one expected. He invested his own money, not in a skyscraper, but in a new independent architectural firm dedicated to sustainable urban development, with Alara Vance as its founding partner and chief designer. He didn't just give her a job, he gave her a platform to realize her dream. Their story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in stocks or possessions, but in integrity, trust, and the courage to believe in the goodness of others, even when the world tells you not to. It shows that sometimes the greatest offers don't come with a contract, but with a simple, heartfelt apology in the rain. What do you think? Was Julian's apology enough? Could you forgive someone who distrusted you so deeply? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Alara and Julian's story, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story of redemption, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas that touch the heart. Thank you for watching.